Welcome back to the Green Room and the second part of this special election 2011 webcast, brought to you in the interests of fairness and balance. Copyright Fox News. On a night in which our major TV network featured a leaders' debate featuring only two leaders. We've been watching and monitoring that debate all evening, but now I'd like to welcome Green co-leaders Metiria Turei and Russell Norman to discuss their thoughts about the debate and also their own campaign policies. Kia ora. Welcome back to both of you. So what first impressions? Did you enjoy watching the debate, or could you just not resist tuning into the webcast?
It was hard not to watch this. It was a much more interesting discussion. Much of the debate I thought was the same usual rhetoric, actually, that we've heard, and the same policies. I shouldn't be quite so mean, but the same stuff. I didn't hear a lot that was particularly new, but you know, that's probably not a bad thing. You've got to get the messages out, I guess.
I think it partly, I guess it's the format, but it's quite scrappy and combative, which makes it hard for them really to communicate a vision, if they have one. It's hard for them to communicate a vision. I'm sure they do have some kind of vision, but in that context, it's quite a challenge.
The perception I've gleaned, I don't know how subjective this is that Labour has, out of the two major parties, kind of set the policy initiative, and National has had to react to it. Did that come across in the debate at all, as far as you were concerned, or were they just talking over the top of each other?
I think probably what happened was National spin doctors kind of had that perception as well, and had trying to front foot Key. So when you see Key now, I saw him today at the Business New Zealand conference where we were all speaking, and he's trying to front foot the idea that he has this big policy agenda, and he's setting the agenda because he's trying to get over that perception.
Yeah. Was there a moment during the debate where you wished you were there, Metiria?
Oh, there's lots of... I tend to shout at the tally, so I had to keep that under control. Yeah, it's...
Or where you would like to have raised a substantive point that was being glossed over?
Things like, you know, early on there was talk around the jobs, for example, and employment. And, you know, Key does his usual thing, saying that raising the minimum wage is going to, you know, lose us jobs. But he has overseen, you know, more than 5,000 jobs lost in the public service, and for some reason, you know, this kind of what I think is quite frankly hypocritical. You can't argue sensibly or rationally that some job loss is okay over here and then not look rationally at other issues, you know, around minimum wage. So I find that very frustrating, and if you're not there, you can't you know, interrupt or contribute to that debate.
But
you know, that's just
shout at the television.
Shout at the tally. Yeah, I'm sure many New Zealanders did that tonight. Spent a lot of time shouting at the tally.
Yeah, we got a few tweets actually coming through at the time. They were acting like kids and so on. But they always say, at least there wasn't a worm. Well, as far as I know, there wasn't a worm.
Well, there was only like those threads of the red and the blue and the green's ad.
The green ad
that ran through.
That was good. Yeah. I mean, this has been talked about before. That, you know, despite what you think about what National may be saying, or Labour, but particularly National, you may find yourself in a position of having to reach an accommodation with them at some way under our proportional system. Where do you stand officially on how you will work with who? Russell.
My turn.
It's a really frustrating interviewing co-leaders. Would you just be a little more orthodox?
So the party had a very long discussion about this because, you know, it's a big issue. Yeah. And so where we came to is that the first thing for us is that we're an independent party, and asserting our independence is very important. That we have, you know, a kaupapa which is, you know, making progress on social justice, environmental sustainability, peace and democracy, and respecting the treaty. So we want to make sure that we make progress in our negotiations. So that's got to be the grounding for it. Probably grounding is not a very good word after Rena, but the ground for it has to be about making progress on those issues. We said our preference was Labour based on policy, but we'd need to get policy gains. With regard to National, we said it's highly unlikely. So that's the position that the party as a whole came to.
So you would just be hands off with National?
No, that's the thing. It's not about it being hands off. It's about finding areas like we have done in the last 3 years where there's some common agreement and working on those. And we're not supporting them to be in government. We oppose them almost all the time, probably more than practically any other party in Parliament. But there are some areas where we agree, like home insulation, and we have a responsibility to get progress. That's the thing. So working collaboratively across the political spectrum is really important. That's what...
You don't feel that getting deeper into, well, I say bed, with a National-led government would help you advance some of your policies more, or do you see warnings from history
Many warnings.
Well, I mean, you know, we're, if you like, pragmatic visionaries. I mean,
Yeah.
so, you know, people vote for us because they believe in the green vision. And our job is to try to do whatever we can to progress that. So that's why we've worked with National on the home insulation scheme, the cyclone, and all
But
the
getting
rest.
too much further might damage your clean green brand.
Well, it's also a question of would you vote confidence and supply when they were doing all these other terrible things. So,
Well, yes.
so that's why that's highly
Better to
unlikely.
avoid that horrible decision.
Well, yes, and what we have learnt too from the other political parties that have gotten very close to government and been in government is that it has tended to be quite bad for them. So all of them have practically died away in some form. From the Alliance, New Zealand First, ACT, you know, Progressives, United Future, they all have declined as a result, I think, of their being involved in government too closely, so too desperate for the position of power and insufficient policy gains. But the other part of it is they haven't stopped those big parties doing things that they believe were wrong. And I think that is an aspect of MMP that hasn't been explored yet. I mean, how you deal with that, because there are things that you just have to stop if you're going to be supporting a government.
And you can march up Queen Street, that's one way to do it.
That's one way, like
Well, that
mining
gives-
in national parks.
I mean, that
great.
gives the lie in some ways to what advocates of MMP say are its great strengths, that, you know, that it does ameliorate extremist positions and so on. But actually, as you say, the things that people have opposed haven't been stopped.
Well, I mean, I think it depends a bit on the numbers at the end of the day. I mean, if National gets an absolute majority at the election, then there's no real check on them. So it is.
Do you
it does
think that's a
depend.
likelihood?
I think it's possible based on the polling. I mean, who knows? We're still, you know, nearly 4 weeks away.
Okay, you said polling. My perception of Greens support is that it's your supporters, you said they were idealistic. Are they also quite young and quite female? Is that a fair generalisation?
There's sort of there's a ever so slight tendency towards under 45s and ever so very slight tendency towards female voters. But I mean, there are more female voters in the country than there are male ones.
I only ask because to grow you have to take people from other parties, you know, swinging vototers. What Richard Prebble used to call rat bags.
It's like practically everybody. But
Whether you'd want them or
yeah.
not. But I mean, and I have this perception that, you know, a lot of mainstream voters perceive you still as slightly extremist and slightly idealistic and not particularly practical and realistic. How do you get those voters across, and are you seeing it happen?
Well, I mean, if you look at the polling, the answer is yes. So we're polling 10% or around there, and I think that we can grow the vote further between now and the election. And if you look at what we've prioritised, you know, green jobs. So talking specifically about the economy and what the green economy looks like. We've focused about getting kids out of poverty, cleaning up rivers. So we've tried to focus on things that are quite visionary and important, but putting in the practical steps to get there.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I think the other part of it is that there is a lot of wash between National and Labour, for example. You know, this idea of there being a very tribal approach in New Zealand politics isn't actually true. There's a lot of people washed between National and Labour. That's why we get National Labour governments. And there's a lot of wash that goes around all the other parties as well. So the question is, how do we make sure that we are talking to the majority of people about the things that are important to them? And I think we're doing that now.
We just had a news alert that the Rainer down in Tauranga may be getting much worse, much underlined. Do you have any response to that, since we have breaking news? Do you think it's a warning?
It is a warning in the sense that, so the Rena, you know, we've lost maybe 160 tonnes overboard of oil. Who knows how much more we're going to lose? And we've struggled to deal with that. And here we have a government that is absolutely determined to do deep sea drilling. And how will we contain a spill that's literally 1,000 times larger? And, you know, I just don't think the government's got its head around
John Key
it.
says that's a stranded container ship on a reef off Tauranga. It's not the Gulf of Mexico.
And I say that's oil, and that's oil.
Yeah.
That's right. It's oil, and it's oil on our beach. And the point is that we asked them, are you ready to deal with a spill? Have you got what you need? They said yes, knowing that they'd been told by the experts that no, they did not. I mean, they really did not tell the truth. What worries me about this, and is that there's still a significant amount of oil on the ship. They've taken out a great deal, which has been great, but there's oil coming up onto the beaches that was spilled earlier. So these spills will have a long-term impact, and there's families there that rely on those beaches for their food source. You know, this is kaimoana here, so it's going to be affected for a very long time if it's getting significantly worse.
There we go, 5-metre waves for the next 48 hours. That's why it's getting worse. Well, I guess nature will do that.
The chain will take its course.
Yeah, so, I think it's good that they've managed to get so much off as they have in the calm weather, but the fact is that we didn't have the resources we needed to make sure that we could get it dealt with very, very quickly, and now we've got this problem. You
mentioned the offshore drilling, and we discussed this in the last session before you guys came on, but that fundamental conflict between extractive industry and economic growth, and the kind of economic vision that you are proposing, which is based on a much greater degree of sensitivity and technology and so on and so forth. Are they listening? I mean, are ordinary voters listening? Do they see jobs? I mean, you say there are jobs in it, but do they see the jobs, and how do you convince them?
Well, I mean, I think if you look internationally, there is a huge growth in the green economy. Just the clean energy sector is rapidly expanding from a $400 billion a year industry to an $800 billion industry over the next few years. And it's grown rapidly over the last few. And New Zealand has some great opportunities in renewable energy generation. And that is one of our key opportunities. We need like a Fonterra of renewable energy to be exporting that technology to the world. It's a huge industry. Like 1% of the global energy sector would be worth tens of thousands of jobs in New Zealand, a $6 to $8 billion industry, export industry. So, you know, I think that there is change happening. Parallel to that, however, we're seeing the last desperate grab for the last of the fossil fuel. And that's what deep sea drilling is all about. That's what fracking is all about. Those who are focused on that are going, it's getting harder to get, there's more risk, but we've got to grab the last of the fossil fuel. And that's what they're desperate to get. And it's very, very valuable. So people are willing to take enormous risks with our environment to get it. And what we're saying is, no, look, this is the alternative path. We need to take this path now. New Zealand's nicely situated to do it.
And it involves more than just environmental policy. It involves the entire integrated economic policy. So, I mean, you need investment policies because you need to set up and grow those new green industries. You need to, if we're going to export them, you need to do something about the volatility of our dollar. These are big issues, and of course the other great thing that people like John Key will say about the Greens is that you're not economic managers, you're dreamers.
Yeah. I think if you look at the history of New Zealand economic policy, the last decade or 2 decades haven't been a rip-roaring success. And part of the problem has been the monetary policy, obviously, that the Reserve Bank's run. It was, I've been on panels with Don Brash over the last few days. It just didn't work, and so we've had a high and fluctuating. No, he hasn't admitted that. But the global financial crisis has created a lot of space to actually have a new discussion about how we regulate the finance sector, what kind of monetary policy we run, what kind of prudential policy we run. And the Greens, in our policy documents have put forward a whole bunch of ideas around that. If you look in terms of access to capital, the government says we have to privatise these the state-owned enterprises in order for them to access capital. Actually, when we sell them off, those businesses will get none of that capital. It'll all go to the government. Whereas what we're saying is let's issue green energy bonds so ordinary New Zealanders can invest in those companies, give them the capital they need so that they can project offshore. There is an alternative model which actually looks at the capital market, looks at getting prices right, carbon, water, waste, and also looks at our economic opportunities.
How did you come up with the trifecta of your three main policy planks? Yeah. It's good that it's simple, and you can't argue with any of it. Yeah. Kids, rivers, jobs. Yeah. Tell me about the process of developing it.
Well, it was a long. Well, no, it's right. It was a long one. We have always been a very policy-focused party, and so our campaigns have always been full of policy. We've got a huge number of ideas. We want to talk to New Zealanders about it, and so finding a way to constrain that a little bit so it's clearer about what our priorities are has been really important. It took us a while, and it took a lot of work with various parts of the party and people being engaged in the process to talk about what kinds of priorities we should have, how we should talk about them. Did we have the policy content? Could we do the numbers to make sure that as we developed each priority that we had secure numbers about it? And that was really important, so that was part of the criteria. Can we afford it, and do we think that the solutions are right? So, but in the end of the day, you get to our vision, our charter is about the environment, it's about justice, and it's about people, and that's so having an economic approach is really important.
New Zealand. I just thought you were going to cut my taxes. Have I been deluded all the
Yeah.
Didn't you get those demands?
Actually, I saw someone opine today that you might have wanted a little more debate about the richer tag, that you would have, people to have perhaps not got the irony and wanted to take you on about that. Did you want a bigger debate about that? I mean, a lot of people thought it was very clever as well.
I'd love to have a debate about it, because it would be really fun.
What did you mean by it?
But actually, people really did just get it instantly.
Got it. Yeah.
That actually, what makes for a rich country is one where everyone's doing well, and so is the environment and the economy, and those things have to be done together. You can't do one without the other.
Yep.
And I guess that's part of our sort of 14-year parliamentary journey has been. As a Green Caucus, 14 years, 17, a long time.
699.
Yeah, it's or maybe not. That we have been trying to bind these things together in the minds of the public, and we finally have done that, I think, and more people are coming on board.
And Russell, I see you're up in the preferred PM polls.
Not that far, it's got to be said.
It's all relative. And, as we said earlier, the party is now classified as a medium-sized party.
Right.
There's also this perception, of course, that's the good news, that your vote softens the closer you get to election day. I don't know why that might be, but...
It's actually not always true, but I mean, in a way I don't mind that there's the perception, because it's like, hey everyone, whatever camera I'm meant to look at, make sure you vote on election day.
See? That's what Muldoon used to do.
Yeah, make sure you vote. And, make sure you get on the roll before you go to vote. But,
Yeah. And when do you both get a chance to get on TV and or singly or together and debate?
What, each other?
Next. No, what you...
That would be quite fun. Yeah. We're on the other leaders' debates, the MMP leaders' debates, and so both Russell did one on Saturday, and I did one on Sunday. So we are involved in that, which is good. Yeah. But it was more important, I think, for the country to see all of the leaders together, so that there was some sense of equity around the choices that the people were making.
Oh, well, let's hope we've redressed the balance somewhat this evening.
I'm sure we have.
And I've appreciated the opportunity. Thanks very much.
We've made history tonight.
We have. And thanks for letting me be part of it.
Thank you.
And that is it, really, from the Green Room. Thank you very much for watching. thank you for your tweets and emails and texts. Enjoy your election campaign. That's it from us. Good night.
Kia ora, good night.
Kia ora.